Welcome to Strategic Execution, Path to Profitability. Denise Harrison, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, will be presenting her findings based on working with hundreds of companies on strategic planning and strategic execution. Denise brings a wealth of hands-on experience to this subject. Prior to working for the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning, Denise worked for a Fortune 500 company holding a variety of positions, including president of one of their divisions, and then moved on to be president of a financial services firm. Denise, before we start the webinar, can you tell us why you found strategic execution so important?
Thank you, Dana. Well, as Dana mentioned, I was CEO of a financial services company. And I was brought in, well, you don't bring a new CEO in because things are good. And when I first interviewed for the job, there was a trickle of red ink. When I actually joined the company, I found that trickle had turned into a waterfall. And every single one of my direct reports knew exactly what we needed to do to save the company. Unfortunately, each and every one of them had a different idea. So I got the whole team together, I got everyone's best thinking, and we decided of all our possible choices, we decided to pursue the few objectives that we thought would get the company out of the ditch it was in. Focusing on the few with clear roadmaps and monitoring allowed us to turn the company around. And in fact, after the second year, we achieved more profitability than we had in our whole prior history. And that's when I learned strategic execution was important. Still, many other CEOs have had this problem, and they weren't necessarily in the dire circumstances that I had found myself in. I've talked to many CEOs who've had a great strategic planning session, and then a year later, nothing's happened. Margins have gone down. They left the strategic planning with great motivation, the team really pulling together. Then a year later, nothing really happened. What happened? What causes a great strategic plan to become mediocre? Well, after looking at and working with over 100 companies, I found that when I see these types of train wrecks, there are three areas that you can really focus on as a CEO or senior leader to prevent these train wrecks from happening. And in this webinar, I'm going to give you some hands-on information that you'll be able to utilize with your company. So for each of these three keys to success, I'm going to talk about what it is and how you do it. I'm going to talk about potential pitfalls that could happen and their impact on profitability. And finally, at the end of each section, I'm going to leave you with a checklist so you can check and see if you're doing what it takes to get your strategic plan to the goal line. First, let's talk about some statistics. What we've found over the course of our 30 years is that if all you do is develop a strategic plan, you'll only achieve about 30 to 40% of your objectives. And that's why strategic planning gets a black eye, because so many people develop good strategic plans and then nothing happens. If you then take that plan and choose the 8 to 10 key strategic initiatives that you want to focus on and develop clear roadmaps for their execution, you in fact will achieve 70%. So it's so important to take that big picture, that 3 to 5 year vision, and drill it down to the most important projects for the next 12 to 18 months, and then clear roadmaps. This is where strategic planning gets into tactics, and you need those tactics to actually achieve your strategic plan. So strategy and tactics need to go hand in glove so that you have strategic management and achieve your plan. If you then take those action plans and monitor to make sure you're staying on track or changing direction if new information comes in, you'll actually achieve 90% of your strategic plan. So now I'll start with the keys to success. And the first I'm going to talk about is monitoring. Now you'll see there's a number 3 by monitoring. So I'm going to talk about each one of these 3 keys to success in order of their importance. So we're going to start with the third most important, monitoring. So what is monitoring? Monitoring is monthly meetings that you report on the progress of your key strategic initiatives. Why do you bother? Well, first of all, it keeps the team on track. It allows for changes due to market conditions, and it raises the visibility of your key strategic initiatives on a regular basis. So we all get pulled into the day-to-day, and this, on a monthly basis, you talk about your initiatives, and it just reminds everybody what we all agreed upon as we left our strategic meeting. So, how do you monitor? First of all, you need your whole strategic planning team in on the monitoring meeting. Team participation is important. This way, you get all of the team, you get everyone understanding where everything is, and if you've missed something, this allows other people to perhaps catch it. We suggest the meetings are monthly, so you keep this in front of the whole team on a monthly basis. In this meeting, you update your action plans, and you do this in a consistent format. We find that when you do it in a consistent format, it's easier for the other team members to see what's going on. And basically, if you're the team leader for a strategic initiative, you review what you accomplished the last month, you talk about what you're going to do this coming month, and you schedule it so that you know exactly what's going to happen when, and ideally, if there are any roadblocks in you actually achieving this, you will see what's going on and how to get through those roadblocks in a proactive way. In addition, a monthly monitoring allows for change. So if there are new opportunities you want to discuss or changing business conditions, this is your chance to make those changes. So sometimes strategic planning, people criticize it because, well, things change and, how do you work on your strategic plan? But a monitoring meeting allows you to make those changes when business conditions change. And let me give you a real example. I was working with a remote video inspection team. Now, what's remote video inspection? These are the probes that have these tiny cameras at the end, and you send the probe in. So let's say you have a sewer that's plugged. So rather than digging up the whole sewer, you can send in this probe, and you find out what's actually going on and how to release whatever is plugging up your sewer. Or if you're looking at an aircraft engine and the aircraft have flown through a number of birds and you want to see if the engine's damaged, a probe allows you to look up in the engine to see if there's anything critically wrong with it rather than taking apart the whole engine. Or if you're looking at a nuclear containment vessel, you can send a remote video inspection probe in there and you can see if there's any corrosion. Well, this team finished their action plan in August of 2001, and we had decided as one of our action plans that we were focusing on the commercial airline market. This was because, in fact, as a rare basis, the airline industry in 2001 has actually turned profitable, just a little profit. It was a growing area, and when you're standing on a ladder using a video probe, you need to be able to hold on to it and manipulate it, and our remote video inspection equipment was very easy to handle, and so that was the reason why we had a competitive advantage. Great strategic plan, we had a clear roadmap, and we went into September aggressively pursuing it. But unfortunately, on September 11th, well, 9/11, planes flew into the World Trade Center. Another plane flew into the Pentagon. One landed in a field in Pennsylvania. And after that tragedy, the commercial airline industry was in turmoil. We knew as a team that that was no longer where we should be focusing our efforts. So in our monitoring meeting, we identified the fact that this segment was no longer attractive, and with the turmoil, the growth that we had expected would not be there. Additionally, we said the military aircraft would be growing because we knew our nation would retaliate, and we knew that we would be flying missions, and these missions would often be in places with lots of sand. And one thing that's not good for aircraft engines is sand. Sand and aircraft engines are just not a great combination. So in this way, we were able to take our strategic plan and this strategic initiative, and rather than continuing to focus in an area which was no longer attractive, we were able to reallocate our resources and focus on an area which, in fact, with the change was appropriate to focus on. And that's the power of a monitoring program. It allows you to make for these course corrections and allows your strategic plan to be a living document, not just something you had this great vision and then you never changed. So now you know what monitoring is and how you do it. What are some of the pitfalls that we've seen? Well, I find, and of course we all hate meetings, if you don't do your monitoring meetings monthly, we find that when teams move back to quarterly, they get behind. And this is why. With a monthly meeting, if you're like me and you're deadline oriented, you miraculously get everything done for that monthly meeting. But if you only have quarterly meetings, it's really hard to do 3 months worth of work to get ready for the meeting. And if you're not on track for that meeting, it's hard to really catch up for those 3 months after the meeting, and it sets you further and further behind. So we think the frequency of the meetings is very important, and monthly is what we recommend. Next, action plans are not updated before the meeting. So one of the jobs of the action plan team leaders is to make sure everything's up to date. And the problem with this is then you're just not prepared and you're not ready to talk about what you accomplished. And more importantly, you're not ready to schedule what you want to do in this next meeting. So your action plan team leaders need to come prepared. Next, if someone is not on schedule, it's often that the team just says, okay, just catch up, or it's kind of the blame game. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're team leader of an action plan, you are the person who's accountable for keeping it on track. But I find my most successful teams are ones who, when an action plan team leader has run into a roadblock or a bottleneck, the team gets in there and resolves the problem by allocating additional resources or coming up with new ways to accomplish the task and overcome the particular roadblock. And let me give you a very simple example. I looked at an action plan team, and the team was reviewing it. And one step was behind because the person was traveling internationally. And so he said, I'm going to try and catch up this next month. Well, that following month he had international travel also. So the next action plan team meeting, he said, I'm behind. And someone said, now wait a minute, you're still doing a lot of international travel. Why can't I do the research for you? And when you get back in town, with the research completed, you'll be able to make the phone calls necessary to get this step completed. And I know this is a simple example, but if these are the key strategic initiatives that your team has selected to work on, then it's really important that all of you agree on the importance and look for ways to resolve the bottlenecks. And that way your whole team will be moving the plans forward. And so don't just leave out somebody out there in a lifeboat. You have to go and save them because you are the people who selected these strategic initiatives. Another mistake I see teams make, in order to streamline their meetings, they review by exception rather than a total review. So what's happening is, let's say an action plan is on track, it gets a green light. Someone else is behind, that's a red light, and someone else is really behind, that's a red light. I'm sorry, the little bit behind was an orange light, and the way behind was a red light. And I've had teams that just reviewed the orange light and the red light. Well, that sounds okay because you're spending the most time on the things that need your attention. But we have to remember that part of the monitoring process is to give visibility and communicate. So let me tell you the story of a team that was on track, and they were supposed to launch a new product. And every month they were green light. Everything was going well. The new product development was going well. The marketing was going well. The training was going well. So it kept getting green light, green light, green light, and they never discussed the action plan. When the launch actually occurred, in fact, it was on time, and the marketing was there. and the team was trained, but they hadn't registered the product in all of the countries that they were depending on for their growth. And because of that registration, the launch went much more slowly because they had to wait for that registration to actually occur. And so the overall growth was not what had initially been planned. So this is important why you should actually report on the whole action, every action plan, because had this team, who was really doing well and really on track, said this is what we accomplished and this is what we're going to do, someone in the monitoring meeting might have noticed that the product registration wasn't there. So let's face it, none of us are perfect, and none of us develop perfect roadmaps. And this would have allowed someone to perhaps notice that this wasn't there, allow it to be put in the action plan, and ideally this could have been caught before the actual launch. So remember to review all the action plans. Yes, the things that are on track can go more quickly, but review the ones that are on track to remind people that this still is an important project, to give it the visibility. And also, this gives you a chance to perhaps catch something that you might have missed. Changing based on business conditions or project relevance. So I've already discussed the remote video inspections. I have another example. So I told you I ran a financial services company, and all of our processing was in Mexico, and we were trying to automate the process. So I told you we had a lot of red ink, and one way to do it is to reduce your costs, so we're trying to automate the process. During the course of our automation project, the peso devalued, went from 3 pesos to the dollar to 6 pesos to the dollar. So basically my labor costs were cut in half. Well, what was the point of continuing on this project? Because A, we were trying to reduce labor costs, and now labor costs had been cut in half. And 2, as it turned out, the technology was not really where it needed to be for us to fully automate. And it looked like the technology, as it matured, we actually would have a good automation process, but in its current young state, we just weren't getting the accuracy that we needed. And so we killed this action plan. And that was important because business conditions changed and the technology wasn't where we needed it to be, so it didn't make sense for us to continue, and instead we allocated resources to other projects. Another pitfall that I find is declaring victory before the initiative is completed. And where I see this usually is in new product launches. So the team develops their new product, it's launched, and then we declare victory. But wait a minute. The objective shouldn't have been just to launch a new product, because that doesn't really show a result. The importance of the objective was to launch a new product to achieve a certain revenue target at a certain margin. And by declaring victory just at launch, you may in fact not achieve that revenue target. So often in the first 3 to 6 months of a product launch, things need to be tweaked. Perhaps you need to tweak the packaging because your new product is arriving damaged. Or perhaps there's a tweak in the marketing message. You didn't quite hit it right and it's not really telling people what they need to know about your product. Or perhaps you need to go back in and retrain your salespeople because the training had taken place before they actually could hold the product. And now that they see it, they want to be retrained because they just need a little more focus. So it's important that you don't declare victory until you achieve that revenue target, or sometimes it's also important for the margin piece because often products are developed without really streamlined production in mind. And so while you may have a product, it often takes the first 3, 6 months, sometimes it's even longer to get the kinks out of the manufacturing process or to come up with alternative and cheaper sourcing. So it's important before you declare victory to make sure you're achieving that objective. And then the most important and the one place where I see most people run into train wrecks on the monitoring part of the process is they add projects without taking one away. So in the monitoring process, it needs to be flexible enough so that when a new opportunity comes up, you can evaluate it. Now, what I mean by evaluate it is you present it to the rest of the strategic planning team and you hold it up against the 8 to 10 objectives that you've already chosen. And if it's more important than one of those objectives, you can put it on your list and take something off the list and then move on. If it's not more important than the strategic initiatives that you've already chosen, then you just save it and evaluate it in your next strategic planning process. But what I find happens when a train wreck occurs is that a new opportunity comes up and it's great and it's added. And then another new opportunity comes up and it's added. And then you started out the year with maybe 8 or 10 projects and the end of the year with 15, but none of them are done. So that's what's so important about monitoring is it gives you the tools to add a project or change the project list, but if you add one, you need to subtract one. Now, how does this impact profitability? First, it forces you to keep on track. So if you have your strategic initiatives and you don't monitor during the year, just at year end, many times you find you've just lost track of these because the urgency got in the way of importance. Next, it allows you to make course corrections when business conditions change. And this means instead of going blithely along a project that no longer makes sense because it's a market segment that isn't as attractive, or in my case, you've already achieved your objective, you can go spend your money somewhere else. That means you're allocating your resources where you're not going to optimize your future success. So monitoring is that tool that you have to make those course corrections. And this reminds everybody these are the key strategic initiatives that we're focusing on, and on a monthly basis it gives them visibility and it reminds people to make sure that these important projects move on. And that's how monitoring can help you impact your profitability, because if you stay on track, you'll achieve your intended results and achieve the return that you're expecting, and it'll help position you for the future. What's the monitoring checklist? Well, first, we've already said monthly meetings. Next, your team leaders need to be prepared. Next, the team needs to identify problems and develop solutions. You need this not to be the blame game, but how can we create a solution that resolves the bottleneck here. Stop and change action plans when business conditions change or there's new information. When new opportunities are presented, so that's allowed, but don't let them just add projects. Make sure you're taking one away. And the most important thing on this checklist is when you walk out of that meeting, you need to be walking out of the meeting with a clear picture of what needs to be accomplished in this next month so that you're moving all of your strategic initiatives forward. Now, we've talked about a lot. Let me have you think about this and think of your monitoring process and think about, are you doing all the things on this checklist? Next, and this is the second most important, do you have clear roadmaps for your big projects? And do you understand where you're going? So you know what this is like. You get directions of how to go somewhere. Are you just getting big broad sweeps of, oh, you just go west and you'll run into where you want to go? Or do you have a clear turn-by-turn example with what's the distance and what are the landmarks you're looking for? How would you rather get directions? Do you want specifics or do you want broad-based approach? So, you first need a clear statement of intended future results for each strategic initiative. And the statement needs to be specific, it needs to be measurable, it needs to be attainable, it needs to be relevant, tie back to your strategy, goals, and objectives, and it needs to be time-bounded. Once you have a clear statement of intended future results for that strategic initiative, you then need that detailed action plan to achieve it. So this isn't this broad brush, oh, you go west and you get to it. This is the detailed turn-by-turn instructions with actual distance and landmarks along the way. Why? Well, this clarifies what needs to happen in order for you to achieve the strategic initiative. So how do you do this? First, you need a team leader, a champion. So this is something that over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, I've really started to focus on. So typically when you walk out of your strategic planning meeting, you have your strategic initiatives and you have a team leader responsible for it. But notice here I said champion, because I find the teams that I work with that are more successful in execution is that they've assigned it to someone who's a champion. This is a person that has fire in his or her belly to get this to the goal line. For people who just hand out assignments or try to spread them out throughout the team, which by the way is a good thing to do, but if you get someone who doesn't have fire in their belly to get it accomplished, they tend to be less successful. The second part of it is the team leader should not develop the action plan in a vacuum. So they should have a quick outline or flow chart and identify the key team members who will be important to achieving this strategic initiative. By identifying the team, and I'm thinking 3 to 5 people, and getting them involved in how to actually achieve the objective, you're going to get a much more robust action plan because you're getting diverse opinions, and you're also getting the buy-in for the people who you've identified as being the key players to actually getting this to the goal line. Next, you need to make sure you have clear objectives for each one of those strategic initiatives, the focus on result that we've already discussed, and then the detailed action steps, and these need to be granular action steps with what it is, who's responsible, how much time, and how much money. Now, what are some of the pitfalls? An action plan being developed in a vacuum. And so when that happens, then these action plans tend to not be as successful because the team leader hasn't had the vacuum and they're not as robust, so they tend to go off track because stuff has been forgotten, or we find there was a better way to actually accomplish some of the steps on the action plan. The next two, action plan steps aren't granular or not comprehending the full scope, is really where teams who have just learned how to do action plans, this is where I see the train wrecks because they're not used to doing things step by step. And let me give you an example of what happens. So an IT person developed an action plan for ERP. All right, so I hear a big groan out there because whenever people do ERPs, there's always something that goes on. And his action plan was extremely high level. And it said that he was going to do it, accomplish this in 3 months. So when we reviewed it, I said, you know, this should be touching every part of the organization. And he said, oh, not to worry. I've got a 1,000-line matrix and a Microsoft project in my office. Don't worry about it. And so I asked the other people in the room, I said, now, do you all know what your assignments are on this? Because this is going to touch each one of your departments. And he said, oh, no, these people aren't involved. I'm getting the people who are actually closer to the work. Well, 3 months later, do you think his action plan was on track? Of course not. As a matter of fact, he had made little or no progress. But said, I've got it all under control. We had a couple of roadblocks, but we're moving forward. 3 months later, still no progress. And this is when the CEO jumped in and started holding weekly meetings to get this on track. And the weekly meetings had lots of people in the room to make sure she was touching all bases. Now, that isn't what she should have been doing in order to get things on track, but this is one of those where not comprehending the full scope and really getting into the details held up this action plan for 6 months. And do you think the ERP system was installed in 3 months? No. In fact, it took us 18 months, and we lost the first 6 months by just not really comprehending the full scope of the project. So make sure you've got that full scope well understood. And in addition to that, when you develop an action plan, you need to understand what's necessary for the action plan, but you need to balance against the tactical day-to-day job requirements of all the people who are assigned to a specific action plan. So just because you've decided on a strategic initiative, that person usually still has their day job. And if you think that they're going to be able to do both and both are significant time, unless you've got a really successful cloning program, it's going to be tough. Or maybe you're depending on their evil twin to show up and help them out. So when you have your clear roadmaps, it allows you to assess how much time each person is going to be required to get any one strategic initiative moving forward. And if you see there's obviously going to be a conflict between their day-to-day work and their strategic initiative, you need to think for ways to resolve the overload, to delegate maybe their day-to-day work, or maybe some steps on the action plan, or eliminate some of it, or reduce the scope so that you can actually get things to the goal line, but maybe it's not got quite all the bells and whistles. So thinking about the impact on profitability is this allows you to truly understand and plan for resource requirements. So you don't move forward on a strategic initiative and then find out halfway into it there's just no way it can move forward. Either you don't have the resources, human resources required, or you don't have the cash. This also allows you to see the big projects before you go through the budgeting cycle. And these projects have been decided upon the whole strategic planning team, so this is cross-functional. And so you should have these very well scoped out before you hit budgeting. And this allows you, before you even get to the cycle, to make those haircuts early. Because if you see you have 8 strategic initiatives, and you really only have the resources to do 6, it's easier to resolve this before you get to the budgeting process. In addition, understanding the resources and you understand the desired results, it enables you to determine the ROI and really assess whether or not any specific action plan should move forward. So, what's the checklist for your roadmaps? First, do you have a champion? Make sure you have that action plan team. Are the steps really granular, and is there accountability? Are the time requirements understood? And here's what I mean by that. Let's say there's a step that I know is going to take 10 hours, but I'm going to do 2 of those hours the first week of the month, 3 the second week, 3 the third, and 2 the fourth. So this step may take 10 hours, but in elapsed time, it's actually going to take me a month. It's important that you understand both of those numbers. Are the financial requirements understood? And do we have enough financial resources? And have we balanced those day-to-day against what we need to move our strategic initiatives forward? And most important is, if we accomplish this action plan, will we achieve the strategic initiative? And that's really the litmus test that you have to perform on all of your action plans to make sure you have that clear roadmap with turn-by-turn signals, with distances and landmarks to make sure you're going to get to achieve that result. So we've talked about a lot. And this is another area where if you say to people you need a clear roadmap, of course everybody nods their head. But it's really my teams who start strategic planning and get to this area, the first year their action plans are not as granular as they should be, but over time people get really, really good at this, and their execution really gets much better over time. Now, what's the most important thing that we need to have in order to make sure we prevent execution train wrecks? And that's the focus on the few. And this is where you select those few strategic initiatives to work on. And in selecting those few strategic initiatives, you're focusing on the few. And why? Well, if you have too many initiatives, you make a lot of progress. You make a little progress on a lot of stuff, but no substantial progress on a few. And when people do this, this is when they don't actually get anything to the goal line, but their margins decrease. So, how do you do this? Well, first of all, you start with a strategic planning process that sorts out priorities. And so which are the business segments that you're already in? Which ones are going to get the most emphasis? Usually these are the ones you're going to get the highest return in. And then you've had lots of opportunities that look really good. Which are the ones you focus on? So does your strategic planning process look at which are the ones that are going to give you the highest return against what's the probability of getting that return? What's the overall resourcing and what's the downside risk? And how do you look at those consistently and then select the few you're going to focus on when you have better information? And then assessing what your internal priorities are. So when you do strategic planning, the easy part is saying yes to doing things. But where strategic planning gets difficult is when you have to start saying no. And a good strategic planning process will give you an analysis funnel that will allow you to bubble up the things that are most important and make that decision making much easier. In addition, in the how on focus of the few, once your strategy is developed, you're going to see what you want to do for the next 3 to 5 years. And this is where you then boil it down to the key strategic initiatives that you want to accomplish in the next 12 to 18 months. This is where your strategy goes hand in glove with your tactics. So rules of the road, no more than 10. And if you've got a mega initiative like an ERP system, or an acquisition, then you may even get it down to 4 to 6. And for some of my smaller teams, we stick to 4 to 6. Because if we can get 4 to 6 of our key initiatives done, we're in a significantly better position than we would have been had we not accomplished them or had we taken on too many. So, what are some of the pitfalls in focus on the few? First, we have to do this. So it's not unusual when I work with a team and we go through our second meeting and we've developed our strategy and we've chosen, let's say 8 strategic initiatives to focus on. And then I show up for the third meeting, which is implementation, and we're going to look at all the action plans to make sure they're granular enough and to make sure we have enough resources. And slowly between when I left the meeting, the second meeting to the third meeting, the implementation meeting, we've hatched some new projects. That number 8 strategic initiatives has grown to 15. How'd that happen? Well, it's the we have to do this projects. Now, the we have to do this projects are often things you really do have to do. So it's maybe complying with a specific regulation. But if you really have to do it, to think that you're going to accomplish 15 initiatives, that's probably not reasonable. So if they're have to have, then they need to be on your list and you need to take something else off. And so often what I hear teams doing is saying, well, this has to be done, so we won't put it on the list because we know we're going to do it. Well, that doesn't give you any more resources. So it's important you watch out for that we have to. If you really do, put it on the list. And it's amazing how many things we have to do that we really don't have to do. Inability to say no. I talked about 8 turning into 15. No is one of the most important things you do in strategic planning. It's one of the hardest, but my teams who are good at saying no have excellent execution, and they're much more well-positioned for the future because they've accomplished the strategic initiatives that were on their list. And this next year, they can start picking up on the ones that they weren't able to put on the list the first year. And another pitfall is when you have a strategic planning process that doesn't allow you to research your markets so that when you start trying to prioritize, you're making your decisions based on facts rather than top-of-mind thinking, and allows you to research those opportunities so that when you make your decision, you have them more fleshed out in terms of what the opportunity is, what it will bring to you, and how much it will cost. And this allows you then to have a better discussion about what opportunity or what's the relative importance in the context of looking at things discretely. And that's another pitfall, is often you just look at an opportunity in a vacuum. Your process needs to look at all your choices and then decide what's most important. Now, we think of Steve Jobs and we think of, here's a man who tried everything. He was so creative. Well, what did Steve Jobs have to say on strategy? So here's the quote. Strategy, it comes from saying no to 1,000 things to make sure you don't get on the wrong track or you don't do too much. So all of us see the fun side of Steve Jobs and all the neat, cool things that were developed at Apple under his leadership. But here he is. He's telling us that he had to say no to 1,000 things so they wouldn't go off track or they wouldn't try to do too much. So this is an important lesson. And it really impacts your profitability because if you're not making decisions based on facts, often you're allocating resources to projects that look sexy on the surface but really don't give you the return you were thinking of. It allows you to make decisions based on where you think you want to go in the future and what's the best and how you can differentiate yourself in the marketplace. It allows you to focus your resources with the highest return and helps you prevent overcommitting. And it allows your team to help the resourcing cycles before the budgeting meeting. And the most important thing is when your team focuses on the few and selects them, they're not being done within their silos. They're being done within the strategic planning process so that you have representatives from all the functional areas and the decisions aren't made in silos. They're made as they look across the whole company. So your strategic initiatives are based on a company-wide perspective. So focus on the few, the checklist. So let me ask you this question. Can you name the strategic initiatives that your company is focusing on this year? A, can you name them? And B, are you truly focused on the few? Or do you have that laundry list, that matrix of 20 projects you're trying to keep track of? Is your selection of a strategic initiative balanced? So you should have some that are based on your existing business to make sure that we're doing the things we need to do to stay on our track in our current market. You need to be selecting those few new opportunities that will help you with future growth. And then internally, what are the key things we need to do internally to get where we want to go? Another part of your checklist is, do you have too many? We suggest no more than 10, but 10 in fact may still be too much with your team. So understand what your team can digest in the course of the next 12 to 18 months. And do your strategic initiatives link clearly back to your strategy, goals, and mission. Is your resourcing accurate? And that's not just financial, but also human resources. And have you communicated your strategic initiatives throughout your organization so that everybody knows what's important and that everyone has their oars in the water and they're all rowing in the same direction? And the question you need to be sure you answer is, if you accomplish these strategic initiatives, will your company be in a better place? Now, we've covered the 3 areas that I have found if you focus on these areas, you will have execution success, and this will lead to more profitability in your company. Don't leave execution to chance. Monitor to make sure you stay on track, but also make course corrections where necessary. Have those clear roadmaps. Have each step, where is the turn, how much distance do you need to travel, and make sure you have the landmarks, how much time, how much money, and when will you get there. And finally, focus on the few. Make sure your strategic plan allows you, through research, to have a funnel and bubble up those top priorities. So in your funnel, you put the research on the areas that require research, and then you have analysis tools that allow you to have bubble up the priorities and have that balanced decision making that helps you make the choices. Now, making choices is always difficult, but if you've got a good process, it'll help you bubble up those top priorities. and select those few strategic initiatives that you're going to work on for the next 12 to 18 months, turning that strategy into action. Now, we've talked about how strategic planning is key to your execution success. And if you think your strategic planning process isn't setting you up to make those good decisions around selecting your strategic initiatives and isn't driving it towards implementation, looking at those action plans to make sure you have enough time and money, or you have top-of-mind thinking, then we'd like to extend everyone who's to everyone who's participating in this webinar an invitation to join our seminar, which is Simplified Strategic Planning. This is the 2-day workshop. Typically, we charge $8.95. If you have attended this webinar, you can sign up for $9.95. This is the link, and we'll be sending you an email with this link. If you're listening to an archived version of this presentation, please call Elizabeth Tidd, or if you have difficulty clicking through the link, please call her. Tell her you listen to Strategic Execution, Path to Profitability, and she'll extend this offer to you. Now, we've covered a lot of information. What questions do you have?
Thank you, Denise. The first question is, how many people are on an action plan team?
Well, I suggest 3 to 5, but that's just a rule of thumb. If you're doing something that's a very cross-functional, that number will grow. But I find usually by taking 3 to 5, you're going to get the key people, so that would be my rule of thumb.
How do you select people to be on the action planning team?
This is where if you can do an outline or a flow chart, you'll see who the most, where the big steps are, and you need to think about who's going to be responsible for implementing that step, and that gives you some guidance as to who should be on your strategic plan. I'm sorry, who should be on your action plan.
Good. What happens when people cannot attend the action plan meetings?
Well, we have a rule in our company that you have to attend. Now, when I say attend, that may be by conference call or go to meeting or something like that, because we find when people are excused that somehow their action plans aren't on track. Now, sometimes when an excuse is just one of those things that happens, you have the team leader team leader often has a backup. You have the backup person give the update. But you always have an update for each action plan.
That's very important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another question. You mentioned balancing money. How does a CFO work with these plans during the budgeting cycle?
Well, ideally, before the cycle, the plans have been sketched out so you know how much money is required, and then they go into the budgeting cycle. So the plan, they should be much more specific than if you just started with a budgeting cycle. And what the CFO will do is see if the expenditures are more than we can afford, or if the expenditures are something that we have to go out and get a loan for, then he or she can make those steps. And finally, in looking at that, they can decide if there are cash flow issues and there may be timing that is going to cause an action plan to move a little more slowly just because of the cash is going to be available a little bit later. So that's how you try to get the action plan well scoped out, and then as you go through the budgeting cycle, it's just one more step in making sure we have enough money and seeing if there's any timing issues or seeing if there are any funding issues where we have to go outside to get the funding to move things forward.
Well, that's all the questions that have come in. I want to thank everybody for attending. Again, remember the special offer of a $9.95 instead of $18.95 to attend our seminar. Denise, any final words?
Yes, if you have any specific execution questions, any things that have happened to your company, please feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to walk through them and see if there are any additional suggestions I can make in terms of your specific situation. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for attending. This is the end of the webinar, and we're going to sign off. Thank you very much, and we look forward to having you attend our next webinar. Goodbye.